Some people walk into your life because they need something from you. Others show up because they owe a debt you never knew existed. At 1:40 in the morning, the neon open sign buzzed softly against the front window of the diner, painting the empty booths in shades of blue and red. Grace Morgan wiped down the same countertop for the third time in 10 minutes, more out of habit than necessity. The dinner rush had disappeared hours ago. The coffee pots were half empty. The pie display looked tired. Outside, Manhattan glistened beneath a light spring drizzle that turned the streetlights into blurred streaks of gold. Most nights ended the same way, a handful of exhausted cab drivers, a nurse finishing a late shift, maybe a college student trying to stretch a single cup of coffee into 3 hours of studying. Nothing exciting ever happened here. That was exactly why Grace liked it. Predictable felt safe, predictable paid rent, predictable kept life from falling apart. She stacked menus beneath the register and glanced toward the clock hanging above the kitchen window. 1 hour and 20 minutes until closing. Her feet ached, her shoulders felt heavy. The tiny apartment waiting for her across town suddenly sounded better than anything else in the world. The bell above the diner door rang. Grace looked up automatically. A man stepped inside. He wasn't dressed like the usual customers. Dark charcoal coat, black dress shirt, expensive watch catching a flash of neon light. Everything about him looked deliberate, controlled. He paused for half a second near the entrance, scanning the room with calm eyes before choosing booth 7 by the window. The same booth every time, Grace noticed, because this wasn't the first night, or the second, or even the 10th. For nearly 3 weeks the stranger had appeared at almost exactly the same time. Always alone, always booth 7, always after midnight. She grabbed a menu and walked over. "Evening," she said. "Can I get you something?" The man looked up. For a moment, Grace had the strange feeling that he had been expecting her specifically. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was low and steady. "No sugar? Anything else?" "That's all." It was always all. She nodded and headed toward the counter. Through the reflection in the coffee machine, she could see him staring out the rain-streaked window toward the street, not at his phone, not at other people, just watching, waiting. The coffee was ready less than a minute later. She placed it in front of him. "Thank you, Grace." She stopped. Her name tag was turned backward beneath her apron. There was no way he could have read it. "Have we met before?" she asked. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "No." "Then how do you know my name?" "Everyone here knows your name." It sounded reasonable, yet somehow it didn't feel reasonable at all. Before she could ask another question, he lifted the coffee cup and looked back toward the window. Conversation over. Grace returned to the counter, but the feeling stayed with her. Strange, not dangerous, just strange. 40 minutes passed. Rain tapped softly against the glass. A delivery truck rolled by. The city settled deeper into silence. Booth 7 remained occupied by a man who barely touched his coffee. Around 2:20, 2 loud customers entered, laughing as they crossed the diner. One of them accidentally bumped Grace while she carried a tray. The plates tilted dangerously. Before she could react, a steady hand appeared beneath the tray. The dishes stopped moving. Nothing fell. "Easy," the stranger said. Grace blinked. He had crossed half the diner without her noticing. "Thanks," she said quietly. "No problem." He returned to booth 7 as if nothing had happened, but for the first time Grace noticed something else. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the front door, then toward her, then back outside. Like he was tracking something she couldn't see. By closing time, the rain had become heavier. Grace locked the register and counted receipts while the kitchen lights shut down one section at a time. When she finally approached booth 7, the stranger was already standing. His coffee cup remained half full. "Have a good night," she said. "You too." He placed cash beneath the check holder and walked toward the exit. The bell rang once. Then he disappeared into the rain. Grace picked up the receipt. Her breath caught immediate dollars. The tip was $486.53. Exactly $5. Exactly the amount due on the rent notice folded inside her apron pocket. And as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline, Grace realized the stranger had somehow known that too. The amount on the receipt followed Grace Morgan everywhere the next day. It sat in her thoughts during the subway ride home. It lingered while she stared at the water-stained ceiling above her bed. It even followed her into the morning sunlight that slipped through the narrow apartment window. $1,505. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less, exactly what she owed. The coincidence felt impossible, By late afternoon, she had convinced herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he had seen the notice. Maybe another employee had mentioned it. Maybe she was overthinking everything. Unfortunately, none of those explanations survived very long. The rent notice had never left her apron pocket. No employee knew the amount, and nobody tipped nearly $1,500 for a cup of coffee. By 11 that night, Grace was back behind the diner counter. The familiar smell of coffee grounds and grilled onions filled the air. Neon reflections shimmered across the front windows. Everything looked normal, everything except her. She kept glancing at the door. She hated that she was doing it. Hated that a complete stranger occupied so much space in her thoughts. Midnight came and went. A few regular customers drifted through. A taxi driver ordered meatloaf. A nurse grabbed coffee to go. The city outside glowed beneath damp pavement and distant traffic lights. At exactly 1:38 in the morning, the bell above the entrance rang. Grace looked up before she could stop herself. The stranger stepped inside, same dark coat, same calm expression, same booth. Booth 7. He sat down and looked out the window as if he had never left. Grace grabbed a menu even though she already knew he would not need one. "Black coffee?" she asked. "Please." She folded her arms. "Before I bring it, I have a question." His eyes shifted. "Leave that tip." The diner seemed unusually quiet. Even the refrigerator hum sounded louder. He studied her for a moment. "You needed it. That is not an answer. It is the truth." Grace let out a breath. "People do not give away $1,500 because someone needs it. Some people do. Do you?" A faint smile touched his face again. Sometimes. She hated how little she could read him. Most customers carried their emotions openly. Stress, anger, exhaustion, loneliness. This man revealed almost nothing. It was like trying to read a reflection in moving water. She placed the coffee in front of him. "I still do not know your name." "Sebastian? Just Sebastian? For now." The answer should have sounded arrogant. He took a sip of coffee. Grace returned to work. For nearly an hour, everything remained quiet. Then the weather changed. Rain began tapping against the windows. Wind pushed discarded newspapers along the sidewalk outside. Around 2:15, Grace carried a tray of clean glasses. Voice stopped her. "Do not take Lexington Avenue home tonight." She turned. "What? Use 3rd Avenue instead." "Why?" "Trust me." Grace laughed softly. "That is not usually enough information." "Tonight it is." She stared at him. "You are serious." "Very." The conversation ended there. Sebastian looked back toward the window. Grace stood frozen for another second before returning to the kitchen. The warning bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded sincere. When her shift finally ended, rain covered the city in silver reflections. She locked the diner door and pulled her coat tighter. Sebastian was gone. Booth 7 sat empty once again. Grace walked toward the subway entrance and hesitated. Lexington Avenue would get her home faster. 3rd Avenue would add nearly 10 minutes. She almost ignored his warning. Almost. Something stopped her. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. Maybe the memory of that impossible tip. She turned toward 3rd Avenue instead. 20 minutes later, she reached her apartment building. As she climbed the front steps, her phone buzzed with a local news alert. Road closed after an armed robbery investigation on Lexington Avenue. Police asking witnesses to avoid the area. Grace stopped moving. Cold air brushed across her face. Her eyes locked onto the screen. The incident had happened less than an hour earlier. Less than 6 blocks from the route she normally used. Slowly she looked back toward the dark street behind her. Somewhere across the city, Sebastian Romano already knew something that she did not. And for the first time, Grace began to wonder whether the stranger sitting in booth 7 had been watching more than the diner. Some secrets announced themselves with sirens. Others arrived folded inside a photograph slipped beneath a door. Grace Morgan slept badly. The news alert from the night before kept replaying in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the message on her phone and heard Sebastian's calm voice telling her to avoid Lexington Avenue. By noon, rain clouds had cleared from Manhattan, leaving behind a pale gray sky that matched her mood. She tried convincing herself it was coincidence. Maybe he had heard something on the police scanner. Maybe he knew someone in city government. Maybe wealthy people simply had access to information ordinary people did not. Yet none of those explanations felt complete. By the time her evening shift began, she was more distracted than usual. She dropped a spoon, forgot an order, nearly poured decaf into a regular customer's mug. Her manager noticed immediately. "You look exhausted," he said while counting receipts. "You should get more sleep." Grace forced a smile. "I am working on it." The truth was she spent most of her free time worrying about money, rent, and the future. Now she had added one more problem to the list, a stranger who somehow knew things he should not know. The diner settled into its familiar rhythm as midnight approached. Outside, headlights drifted across wet pavement. Inside, old rock music played quietly through ceiling speakers. At exactly 1:38 in the morning, the bell above the door rang. Sebastian arrived. Grace noticed something different immediately. He looked tired, not physically exhausted, more like someone carrying the weight of too many responsibilities. His dark coat was damp from the cold air outside. He chose booth 7 as always. "Black coffee?" she asked. "Please." She brought it over and hesitated. "You knew about Lexington Avenue." Sebastian looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I suspected something might happen." "How?" "The city talks." "The city talks to you?" A faint smile appeared. "Sometimes." Grace shook her head. "You answer every question without answering anything. Maybe you asked the wrong questions." Before she could respond, the front door opened again. 2 businessmen entered and took a booth near the entrance. The moment distracted her long enough for Sebastian to return his attention to the window. Conversation ended again. An hour later, the diner was nearly empty. Grace stepped outside through the back exit to throw away a bag of trash. Cold air brushed against her face. The alley behind the diner was narrow and quiet. A single security light buzzed overhead. She tossed the bag into the dumpster and turned back toward the door. Something white caught her attention near the bottom step. An envelope. No stamp. No address. Just plain white paper. Grace frowned and picked it up. The envelope felt light. She opened it immediately. Inside was a photograph. Her stomach tightened. The picture showed her leaving the diner 2 nights earlier. The image had been taken from across the street. She recognized her coat, her backpack, the timestamp in the corner. Someone had been watching her. For a long moment she simply stared. Traffic hummed somewhere beyond the alley. A distant siren echoed through the city. The photograph trembled slightly in her hand. No note, no explanation. Grace hurried back inside. Her pulse felt too loud, too fast. She scanned the diner instinctively. The businessmen sat talking quietly. A truck driver ate pie near the counter. Everything looked normal, except booth 7. Sebastian was already watching her. Not the photograph, her face. As if he knew something was wrong, Grace walked over. "Someone left this outside." She placed the picture on the table. Sebastian looked down. The change in his expression lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed it. Grace did. His eyes hardened. The room seemed colder somehow. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Behind the diner. Did anyone see you pick it up?" "I do not think so." Sebastian picked up the photograph carefully. "Go lock the back door." "What, Grace?" His voice remained calm. "Lock the back door." She stared at him for a second, then she did exactly what he asked. Minutes later, after checking every entrance twice, she returned to the dining room. Booth 7 was empty. Sebastian was gone. Only one thing remained behind, a folded receipt sitting beside his untouched coffee. Grace opened it slowly. Written across the back in neat handwriting were 6 words. "You are not the only one watching, and less than a mile away." Someone sitting inside a parked sedan lowered a camera and smiled. Grace Morgan read the message 3 times before she finally folded the receipt and slipped it into her apron pocket. "You are not the only one watching." The words stayed with her through the rest of the shift and followed her all the way home. Manhattan felt different now. The same streets, the same storefronts, the same endless stream of headlights. Yet everything carried a layer of uncertainty she had never noticed before. Every stranger seemed capable of knowing more than they should. Every parked car seemed to linger a little too long. By the time she reached her apartment building, dawn was beginning to soften the sky above the city. She locked her door, checked it twice, then stood in the center of her small living room, staring at the photograph again. The image was unsettling, not because it showed anything dangerous. It showed something ordinary. Her leaving work, her adjusting her backpack, her walking home. The frightening part was realizing someone had cared enough to document it. Grace placed the photograph inside a kitchen drawer and tried to sleep. It did not work. A few hours later, sunlight spilled through the blinds against the nightstand. She ignored the first call, then the second. On the third attempt, she answered. "Hello, Miss Morgan?" a woman's voice asked. "This is St. Vincent Medical Center Billing Department." Grace sat upright immediately. "Is something wrong?" "Actually, we are calling regarding your outstanding balance." Her stomach tightened. Her mother's final hospital bills had been hanging over her for nearly 2 years. Every extra shift at the diner barely made a dent. "Yes, we wanted to inform you the account has been paid in full." Silence filled the room. "What? The balance has been cleared?" Grace stood from the bed. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Miss Morgan. The account is closed. The call ended a minute later, but the confusion remained. She grabbed her laptop and logged into the billing portal herself. The numbers were gone. Every cent paid. The total had exceeded $12,000. No warning, no explanation, no indication who had done it. Grace spent the entire afternoon trying to find answers. The hospital refused to reveal the payer. The billing office claimed privacy regulations prevented them from discussing it. By sunset, she had reached only one conclusion. There was exactly one person in her life capable of making problems disappear without explanation. At 1:38 that night, Sebastian Romano walked into the diner. Grace was waiting. The moment he sat down in booth 7, she crossed the room carrying a coffee pot. "Did you pay my mother's hospital bill?" she asked. No greeting, no small talk, straight to the point. Sebastian looked up slowly. "Good evening to you too. Sebastian, you seem upset. $12,000 vanished today." His expression remained calm. "Did you do it?" For a few seconds he said nothing. The diner lights reflected softly against the window beside him. Outside, traffic drifted past beneath pools of amber streetlight. Finally he spoke. "Would it matter if I did?" "Yes." "Why?" Grace folded her arms. "Because people do not spend that kind of money on strangers. Maybe they should. That is not an answer. It is the only one I am giving." Frustration flashed across her face. Sebastian noticed. So did the older couple eating pie 3 booths away. The tension felt visible. "You cannot keep solving problems I never asked you to solve," Grace said quietly. "Maybe I can." "Why?" For the first time, something changed in his eyes. Not enough to explain him. Just enough to reveal that the answer mattered. Because some things deserve to be fixed. Before Grace could press further, the bell above the entrance rang. A man entered wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap. He ordered coffee to go and chose a seat near the window while he waited. Nothing not unusual. Then Grace noticed the phone in his hand. The camera lens was pointed directly toward booth 7, toward Sebastian, toward her. The stranger lowered the device the instant their eyes met. A second later he stood up, abandoned his coffee, and walked back outside. Grace turned toward the window. A black sedan pulled away from the curb almost immediately. When she looked back at Sebastian, he was all right in sliding. "What is wrong?" she asked. Sebastian's gaze remained fixed on the disappearing vehicle. "The bill was not the reason I came tonight." "Then why are you here?" For the first time since she had met him, Sebastian looked genuinely concerned. "Because whoever left that photograph is getting closer." Fear rarely arrived all at once. Most of the time it crept in quietly, settling into ordinary moments until nothing felt ordinary anymore. Grace Morgan spent the next day trying to convince herself that she was overreacting. She cleaned her apartment, answered emails, bought groceries, followed the same routine she always followed. Yet every time she passed a window, she found herself checking the reflection behind her. Every time a car slowed near the curb, she looked twice. The photograph, the hospital bill, the man with the phone, none of it made sense together. By evening, Manhattan was wrapped in a thick blanket of fog rolling in from the river. Streetlights glowed like distant lanterns. Traffic moved slower than usual. The city felt muted, almost secretive. Grace arrived at the diner early. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh bread should have comforted her. Instead, she felt restless. Around midnight, business slowed. Customers came and went. The clock ticked toward 1:38. She told herself she was not waiting for Sebastian. Then the bell above the door rang and relief appeared before she could stop it. He entered wearing a dark overcoat, rain droplets clinging to the shoulders. Booth 7 waited for him like always. Grace approached with a coffee pot already in hand. "You look tired," she said. Sebastian glanced up. "So do you. I have reasons. So do I." She poured the coffee. "Are you going to tell me what is happening?" "Not yet. That is becoming your favorite answer." A faint smile touched his face, but it disappeared quickly. He looked past her toward the window. Something about his expression made Grace turn around. Across the street, partially hidden by fog, a dark sedan sat parked beneath a street lamp. The engine appeared to be running. "Is that the same car?" she asked quietly. Sebastian did not answer immediately. Maybe that is not reassuring. It is honest. The conversation ended when another customer entered. An elderly man wearing a baseball cap and carrying a newspaper, nothing unusual. Yet Grace noticed Sebastian watching the door until the man sat down and ordered pie. Only then did he relax slightly. For the next hour, booth 7 remained occupied while the fog outside thickened. Shortly before closing, Grace stepped into the kitchen storage room, searching for extra coffee filters. The small television mounted above the refrigerator was playing a local news broadcast. She barely paid attention until a familiar image appeared on the screen. Her eyes narrowed. The report showed footage from a charity fundraiser held earlier that evening. Wealthy donors, business leaders, expensive suits. Then, for less than 2 seconds, the camera captured a man stepping out of a black vehicle surrounded by security personnel. Grace froze. It was Sebastian, the same calm posture, the same dark hair, the same face she saw every night across booth 7. Before she could hear the reporter explain who he was, another employee changed the channel to a basketball game. "Wait," Grace said. "What was that?" "Some rich guy event," the cook replied. "Nothing interesting, but it was interesting, very interesting." When she returned to the dining room, Sebastian was finishing his coffee. Grace studied him differently now. The expensive watch, the tailored coats, the confidence that never seemed forced. Suddenly pieces began fitting together in ways she did not like. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Sebastian met her gaze. "You already know my name. That is not what I mean." For a moment neither spoke. The old clock above the counter ticked loudly. Outside, fog drifted through the streetlights like smoke. Finally, Sebastian stood. "Go home tonight using the main avenue." "Why? Please, Sebastian." His expression hardened. "Just trust me." Before she could argue, he placed cash beside the cup and walked toward the door. The bell rang once. Then he disappeared into the fog. 10 minutes later, Grace locked the diner and started home. She followed the route Sebastian suggested. Halfway to the subway station, she noticed flashing emergency lights several blocks away. Traffic had stopped. A crowd gathered behind barricades. Police officers redirected pedestrians around the scene. Grace could not see exactly what had happened. She only knew one thing. The blocked street was the route she normally took every night. A cold feeling settled into her chest. When she finally reached her apartment building, something was waiting beside her door. Not another photograph, not another envelope. This time it was a newspaper clipping. The article showed a picture of Sebastian standing beside several city officials at a high-profile event. Across the image, someone had written 3 words in black marker: "Ask him everything." The truth often begins as a name that refuses to leave your thoughts. Grace Morgan carried the newspaper clipping everywhere the next day. It sat folded inside her jacket pocket while she rode the subway. It rested beside her coffee cup during lunch. Every time she looked at the 3 handwritten words, "Ask him everything," the problem was simple. She was not even sure where to begin. By late afternoon, curiosity had replaced fear. Fear wanted her to stay away from Sebastian Romano. Curiosity pushed her closer. The name itself had become impossible to ignore. After finishing a few errands, Grace stepped into the New York Public Library branch near Bryant Park. The building felt quiet compared to the noise outside. Warm lights reflected across polished floors. Pages turned softly, keyboards clicked in distant corners. It was the kind of place where secrets should have been impossible to find. Yet within 20 minutes, Grace was staring at a computer screen filled with articles. Most of them seemed ordinary at first. Charity galas, hospital donations, community projects, business awards. Sebastian Romano appeared in photographs beside politicians, executives, and non-profit directors. The public image was almost flawless: wealthy, influential, respected. Yet the deeper she searched, the stranger things became. There were gaps, missing years, stories that ended abruptly, mentions of companies connected to other companies, connected to names that seemed to disappear overnight. Nothing illegal, nothing obvious. Just enough to make her uncomfortable. Then she found another article. It was nearly 6 years old, buried beneath dozens of search results. The headline mentioned organized crime investigations across New York. Several names appeared in the report. One of them was Romano. Her pulse quickened. The article offered no proof, no charges, no conclusions. Yet the implication hung there between the lines. A powerful family, a hidden empire, influence extending far beyond public view. Grace closed the browser immediately. She told herself she did not believe it. She told herself rumors existed about every wealthy person. Still, the name remained in her mind during the subway ride to work. The diner felt different that night. Smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves knew something she did not. Midnight arrived, then 1 o'clock. At exactly 1:38, the bell above the entrance rang. Sebastian stepped inside. The familiar sight should have reassured her. Instead, it raised more questions. He sat in booth 7. Grace approached carrying a coffee pot. "Black coffee?" she asked. She poured carefully. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Grace slid into the seat across from him. The move surprised both of them. "You researched me," Sebastian said calmly. Grace blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because you have the same expression people always have afterward." "What expression is that?" the one that says they found half the story. Outside, rain began tapping lightly against the glass. Booth 7 suddenly felt isolated from the rest of the diner. "Who are you really?" Grace asked. Sebastian looked toward the window. "A businessman. I do not think that is the whole answer. It rarely is for anyone. The articles mention your family." "Some articles mention many things." Frustration flickered across Grace's face. "Why will you not tell me the truth?" Sebastian finally met her gaze. His eyes carried something she had not seen before. Weariness, because the truth changes things. Before Grace could respond, the diner television switched to a late-night news report. A journalist stood outside a warehouse district near the river. Police vehicles filled the background. Reporters discussed an ongoing investigation involving several prominent organizations. The details remained vague, yet one word caught Grace's attention immediately: Romano. The name echoed through the diner. Every sound seemed to disappear afterward. Grace slowly turned toward Sebastian. He had not moved, had not reacted, but silence itself became an answer. A customer dropped a fork somewhere behind them. The sharp sound snapped the moment apart. Sebastian stood and placed cash on the table. "You should go home early tonight." "Why?" "Because tomorrow will be complicated." "What does that mean?" Sebastian hesitated near the door. For the first time since they had met, uncertainty crossed his face. "It means you are about to learn why some people are afraid of my name." Then he walked into the rain, leaving Grace alone with the news report still playing softly in the background and the growing realization that the man she thought she knew might be standing much closer to the center of the mystery than she ever imagined. The moment a name becomes real, everything around it changes. Grace Morgan spent the following day unable to focus on anything except the conversation from the night before, the articles, the news report, the warning in Sebastian Romano's voice. For weeks, he had existed inside a strange space between mystery and familiarity, a quiet customer, a generous stranger, someone who always seemed to appear exactly when she needed help. Now another possibility stood in front of her. A possibility she had tried very hard not to consider. By late afternoon, rain clouds gathered over Manhattan again. Dark shapes rolled across the skyline, turning glass towers into shadows. Grace arrived at work feeling exhausted despite barely sleeping. Every sound seemed sharper than usual. Every customer felt temporary. The diner no longer felt like a safe little island separated from the rest of the city. It felt connected to something larger, something she could not see. Midnight passed slowly. 1 o'clock followed. Then 1:38 arrived. Sebastian stepped inside. This time several heads turned when he entered. Grace noticed it immediately. People recognized him. Not everyone, but enough. A man near the counter lowered his newspaper. 2 customers exchanged glances before everyone returned to their own lives, yet Grace saw it. Booth 7 waited as always. Sebastian sat down. Grace approached carrying coffee. Neither smiled, neither pretended things were normal. "I know your last name," she said quietly. "Sebastian, I assumed you would. I know people are afraid of it. Some are. Should I be?" For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Not fear, regret. "That depends on what you believe." Grace set the coffee cup down. "Then tell me." Silence settled between them. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, the diner lights reflected across polished tables and chrome surfaces. Sebastian stared into the black coffee before speaking. "My family built businesses all over New York. That is not what people say. People say many things. And are they wrong?" He looked toward the window. "Not entirely." Grace felt her stomach tighten. Hearing it spoken aloud made everything more real. "So the stories are true. Some of them. You could have told me. Would you have listened?" The question landed harder than she expected. Grace had no answer, because the truth was simple. If Sebastian had introduced himself as one of the most powerful men in the city on the first night they met, she would have avoided him completely. He seemed to know that. "I never lied to you," he said quietly. "I just did not tell you everything. That feels similar." Maybe. Another customer entered the diner, a delivery driver wearing a rain jacket. He ordered coffee and sat near the front window. Nothing unusual, yet Sebastian tracked the man's movements briefly before returning his attention to Grace. The gesture did not go unnoticed. "You are still watching the doors," she said. "I watch everything. Why? Because somebody else is watching too." The answer chilled her more than she wanted to admit. For weeks she had assumed Sebastian was the center of the mystery. Suddenly it felt possible that he was responding to it as well. Grace folded her arms. "Who left the photographs?" "I do not know." "You expect me to believe that?" "Believe whatever you want." His voice remained calm. "But if I knew, it would already be over." The certainty behind those words made her pause. What she saw next surprised her even more. Exhaustion, real exhaustion, not physical fatigue, the weight of responsibility, the burden of carrying problems nobody else could see. For the first time, Sebastian looked less like an untouchable figure and more like a man trying very hard to keep something under control. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Everything changed instantly. His posture stiffened, his expression darkened, not with anger, with concern. "What happened?" Grace asked. Sebastian stood. "I need to go." "Sebastian," he hesitated. Rain hammered harder against the windows now. Thunder rolled somewhere over the river. "Everything started because of your father," he said. The words hit her like cold air. "What?" But Sebastian was already moving toward the door. "Wait." He stopped only long enough to meet her eyes one final time. "Tomorrow I will tell you the truth." Then he disappeared into the storm, leaving Grace frozen beside booth 7, her pulse racing and one impossible question echoing through her mind. What did her father have to do with any of this? Trust is not built when someone tells you the truth. Trust begins when they finally stop hiding from it. Grace Morgan barely slept after Sebastian's final words. "Everything started because of your father." The sentence echoed through her apartment long after sunrise. She searched old photographs stored in a cardboard box beneath her bed. Family birthdays, school events, Christmas mornings. Her father appeared in all of them with the same easy smile she remembered from childhood. A construction worker, a man who fixed broken shelves for neighbors without charging $1, a man who never talked about himself. There was nothing in those pictures that connected him to Sebastian Romano, nothing that explained why one of the most powerful men in New York seemed tied to her family. By evening, clouds had cleared and the city glowed beneath a deep blue sky. Grace arrived at the diner expecting Sebastian to appear at 1:38 as always. Midnight came. Then, 1 o'clock, the booth remained empty. For the first time since all of this began, he did not show up. The absence felt strangely disappointing. She hated admitting that even to herself. Around 2 in the morning, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Grace hesitated before answering. "Hello, Grace." The voice was unmistakable. "Sebastian." Relief appeared before she could stop it. "Where are you?" "Not at the diner." "I noticed." A brief silence followed. "Can you leave early?" he asked. "Why?" "Because I need to show you something." Every warning bell in her mind should have gone off. Instead, she found herself saying yes. 40 minutes later, a black SUV waited outside her apartment building. The driver never spoke. Manhattan rolled past the windows as they crossed the city. Streetlights reflected off the river. Bridges glowed against the darkness. Eventually, the vehicle stopped outside a quiet townhouse overlooking the Hudson. It was elegant but surprisingly understated. No giant gates, no dramatic displays of wealth, just privacy. Sebastian opened the front door himself. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His coat hung over one arm. "Come inside." Grace stepped into a warm living room filled with bookshelves and floor-to-ceiling windows. The river shimmered beyond the glass. Nothing about the space matched the image she had built in her head. It felt lived in. "Human, this is where you live?" she asked. "Sometimes. I expected something different. Most people do." Sebastian crossed the room and unlocked a small wooden cabinet. From inside he removed a worn cardboard box. The edges were faded with age. Carefully he placed it on the coffee table between them. "What is it?" Grace asked. "Part of the reason I started coming to the diner." Her pulse quickened. Sebastian opened the box. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents arranged with surprising care. He removed a photograph first. Grace stared at it. The image showed a much younger Sebastian standing beside a man wearing a construction helmet. The photograph was faded, but she recognized the face immediately. Her father. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What is this?" she whispered. Sebastian did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the photograph. "Your father knew me a long time ago." Grace sat down slowly. "Yes. How?" Sebastian looked toward the river beyond the glass. For a moment he appeared far older than 36. "That is a longer story." He slid another item across the table, an old silver wristwatch. The crystal was scratched. The leather band worn from years of use. Grace froze. "That belonged to him, I know." Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The watch had disappeared shortly after her father's death. Her mother had searched for weeks. They never found it, until now. "Why do you have this?" she asked, met her eyes. There was no mystery left in his expression now, only honesty. "Because your father gave it to me." Outside, a tugboat horn echoed across the river. Inside, silence filled the room. And for the first time, Grace realized that the answers she had been chasing were no longer hidden somewhere in New York. They were sitting right in front of her. Some discoveries feel less like answers and more like betrayals. Grace Morgan sat motionless on the sofa, her father's old wristwatch resting in her palm. The leather band felt worn and familiar. For years she had believed it was lost forever. Now it sat in her hands because Sebastian Romano had somehow carried it through half her life. The realization should have brought comfort. Instead, it raised 100 new questions. The river shimmered beyond the glass walls of the townhouse. Tugboats moved slowly through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a ferry horn echoed across the water. Sebastian remained standing near the window. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "How long have you known who I was?" Sebastian looked down at the photograph still resting on the coffee table. "Longer than you would like." The answer landed heavily. "How long?" "Months." Grace Sebastian nodded once. "I found your name during an investigation." The word immediately caught her attention. Investigation, not search, not coincidence. Investigation. Grace slowly set the watch back inside the box. "What exactly does that mean?" Sebastian crossed the room and opened a leather folder lying beside several documents. For the first time since they met, hesitation appeared in his movements. Not because he feared the truth, because he knew what it would cost. Grace opened it. Her stomach tightened immediately. The first page contained her name, full legal name, date of birth, current address, employment information, the diner, previous apartments, educational records, family history. Every page revealed another detail. Every page felt like a violation. "You investigated me." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Yes, you had people follow me, not in the way you think." Grace laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "I do not know what else pages. Medical records, property information, old photographs, public documents, notes, timelines, questions." The file looked less like curiosity and more like obsession. "Who does this?" she asked. "Someone trying to find answers. About me? About you?" Abruptly, the room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too crowded. She walked toward the window overlooking the river. City lights stretched across the darkness like scattered stars. "You should have told me, I know. Instead, you sat in my diner every night pretending none of this existed." "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Sebastian remained silent. The silence itself became an answer. Grace folded her arms tightly across her chest. For weeks she had defended him inside her own mind, explained away the secrets, ignored the warnings, trusted him despite every reason not to. Now she was looking directly at evidence that he had been studying her life long before she even knew his name. The betrayal hurt more than she expected, not because he had investigated her, because part of her had begun trusting him. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly. Sebastian looked genuinely surprised. "What? The coffee, the conversations, the concern." Her voice trembled slightly. "Was any of that real, or was I just another file?" For the first time since entering the townhouse, emotion appeared clearly on Sebastian's face. "Grace, answer me. Every conversation was real. Then why hide this?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I knew exactly how you would react." Grace looked away. Unfortunately, he was probably right. A long silence settled between them. Then something on the edge of the desk caught her attention. Another photograph, half hidden beneath a stack of folders. Grace walked over before Sebastian could stop her. She picked it up. The image showed a younger Sebastian standing beside her father nearly 15 years earlier. Both men were smiling. Both looked relaxed. Friends, not strangers. Friends. Behind the photograph sat several additional files, everyone labeled with her family name, Morgan. Grace froze. "There is more." Sebastian's expression darkened. "Grace, how much more?" She opened the top folder before he could answer. Inside were pages she had never seen, interviews, and one line highlighted in red, "Witness to incident, possible life-saving intervention." Grace looked up slowly, her pulse hammered in her ears. The room seemed to disappear around her. "Sebastian," she whispered, "what happened between you and my father? The past has a way of surviving long after the people who lived it are gone." Grace Morgan stood beside the desk, unable to look away from the documents spread before her. "Witness to incident, possible life-saving intervention." The words felt unreal. For years her father had existed only in memories. Birthday parties, Sunday breakfasts, long drives with the radio playing old songs. Never once had she imagined there was an entire chapter of his life that nobody had told her about. Sebastian Romano remained silent for several moments. The river outside moved slowly beneath the city lights. Somewhere beyond the glass, a ferry crossed the dark water. Finally, he stepped closer to the desk and picked up the photograph. 15 years ago, he said quietly. Iris folded her arms. "Start talking." Sebastian nodded once. I was 21, reckless, convinced I understood the world. He looked down at the picture. Your father worked construction on a renovation project in Queens. My family owned the property. Grace listened without interrupting. Most people treated me differently because of my last name, Sebastian continued. A faint smile touched his face. He treated everyone the same. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. That sounded exactly like him. We became friends, Sebastian said. Not close friends, but real friends. He opened another folder and removed several photographs. Grace recognized her father immediately. Hard hat, work boots, coffee cup in hand, laughing beside a much younger Sebastian. The images felt strangely intimate, evidence of a life she had never known existed. Why did nobody tell me? She asked. Because after the project ended, we lost contact. Sebastian hesitated. Then something happened. Grace waited. The room seemed to grow quieter. One evening I made a decision I should not have made. I ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. He chose his words carefully. A situation developed. Your father happened to be there. Grace noticed the shift immediately. He was avoiding details, not hiding the truth, protecting parts of it. And? She asked. Sebastian looked directly at her. And your father stepped in when nobody else did. The answer landed softly, yet its weight filled the room. He helped me. Helped you how? Sebastian reached into the box and removed a folded piece of paper protected inside a clear sleeve. The document looked old, yellowed by time. He handed it to her. Grace unfolded it carefully. It was a witness statement dated 15 years earlier. Most of the text had faded. Only a few sections remained readable. One name stood out immediately: father. Grace swallowed hard. He gave this statement, yes, about you. Sebastian nodded. Without him, my life would have taken a very different path. Grace stared at the document. Her father had never mentioned any of this, not once. Why keep it secret, she asked. I think he believed helping someone should stay private. Sebastian smiled sadly. That sounds like him. For the first time that night, Grace could not argue. It did sound like him. Her father had spent his entire life helping people without asking for recognition. She looked down at the old wristwatch resting on the table. And he gave you this? The day we said goodbye. Why? Sebastian's expression softened. He said a good watch reminds you that time matters. Grace looked away quickly. Emotion threatened to rise unexpectedly. She was not prepared for that. Not here, not now. A long silence followed, then something occurred to her. She turned back toward the folders covering the desk. If this is all true, why spend months investigating me? Sebastian did not answer immediately. That hesitation told her everything. The answer was harder than the story he had just shared. Sebastian, he exhaled slowly, because when I found out your father had died, I needed to know whether he left anyone behind. Grace stared at him. And I found you. The room fell silent again. Outside, the lights of Manhattan shimmered across the river like distant stars. Inside, Grace felt the pieces beginning to connect. Not completely, not yet, but enough to understand one thing. Sebastian had not walked into her diner by accident. Months earlier, he had gone looking for the daughter of the man who once changed his life. Then her eyes drifted toward the final folder still lying unopened on the desk. Across the tab, written in black ink, was a single word. Promise. Promises are strange things. Some are spoken aloud. Others survive for years without a single witness. Grace Morgan stared at the final folder resting on Sebastian Romano's desk. The word printed across the tab seemed almost too simple after everything she had learned. Promise. Outside the townhouse windows, the Hudson reflected thousands of city lights. Inside, silence stretched between them. Slowly, Grace reached for the folder. Sebastian did not stop her. He did not even move. The moment felt important enough that neither wanted to interrupt it. Grace opened the file carefully. Inside were only a few pages. No investigation reports, no financial records. Just a handwritten letter protected inside a clear sleeve. The paper looked old. The edges had yellowed with time. What is this? She asked softly. Sebastian's gaze settled on the letter. The last thing your father ever gave me. Grace felt her heartbeat quicken. She carefully unfolded the page. The handwriting was immediately familiar. She had seen it on birthday cards and lunch notes throughout her childhood. Her father's handwriting. The sight alone nearly stole her breath. The letter was short, simple, direct, exactly the way he had always spoken. Most of it contained ordinary advice: work hard, keep your word, take care of the people around you. Then Grace reached the final paragraph. She stopped reading. Her eyes moved over the words again and again. A lump formed in her throat. If life ever gives you more than you need, the letter read, find someone who needs help and give them a chance. That is how debts should be paid forward. Grace lowered the page slowly. Tears threatened to appear, but she blinked them away. Across the room, Sebastian remained silent. Finally, she looked up. "You kept this all these years every day?" "Why?" Sebastian smiled faintly. "Because I owed him more than I could ever repay." Grace looked back down at the letter. For the first time, pieces that had felt disconnected suddenly began fitting together. The diner, the rent payment, the hospital bills, the constant protection, the questions. The investigation, none of it had started because Sebastian wanted something from her. It had started because of a promise he never stopped carrying. "You have been trying to pay him back," she said quietly. "For 15 years. Sebastian nodded once. "At first I thought money could do it." He looked toward the river. "Then I thought influence could do it. Then protection." A sad smile appeared. "Eventually I realized none of it was enough." Grace understood why. Some debts existed beyond money, beyond favors, beyond power. The room remained quiet for several moments. Then another thought surfaced. "The person watching me." Sebastian's expression immediately hardened. "That situation is ending. Who are they? Someone connected to old questions about me. Questions about you or questions about my father?" Sebastian hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words. Grace noticed it instantly. They were investigating him too. Sebastian looked away. "Only because they knew he was connected to me." For the first time, the entire situation felt clear. Not completely, but enough. Her father had unknowingly become part of a story much larger than himself years ago. And Sebastian had spent 15 years trying to honor a man who never asked for recognition. Grace walked toward the window overlooking the river. The city felt different now, smaller somehow, less mysterious. She finally understood why Sebastian had appeared at the diner every night. Not because he was obsessed, not because he was manipulating her, because he had been carrying a promise for half his life and did not know how to put it down. Behind her, Sebastian spoke quietly. "There is one thing I still have not told you." Grace turned. "What?" For the first time all night, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Not the uncertainty of a powerful man, the uncertainty of a man afraid of losing someone important. "I stopped coming to the diner because of your father." Grace froze. The room seemed to grow still around them. Even the distant city noises faded. Sebastian took a slow breath. "At some point I started coming because of you." Some truths do not break your heart. They simply force you to see it clearly for the first time. Grace Morgan stood motionless beside the window overlooking the Hudson River. Sebastian Romano's words remained suspended between them. "I stopped coming because of you." The city shimmered outside in silver and gold reflections. Ferries moved across dark water. Traffic flowed along distant roads, yet inside the townhouse everything felt still. For weeks Grace had searched for answers. She had followed clues, questioned motives, and doubted every coincidence. Now the mystery that had consumed her life was finally standing in the open. There were no hidden files left, no secret investigations waiting inside another folder, no missing pieces buried in the past. Her father had helped a young man 15 years earlier. That young man had spent half his life trying to honor the debt, and somewhere along the way a promise had become something more personal. Grace slowly turned toward Sebastian. "You should have told me sooner." Sebastian nodded. "I know, it would have saved both of us a lot of confusion." A faint smile appeared on his face. "Probably." For the first time in days, the tension between them eased slightly. Not completely, but enough to breathe. Grace looked down at the letter from her father, still resting in her hands. The words felt different now. "Find someone who needs help and give them a chance." That is how debts should be paid forward. Her father had never expected a monument, never expected repayment. He had simply helped someone because it was the right thing to do. "He would have hated all of this," Grace said quietly. Sebastian looked surprised. The investigations, the secrecy, the expensive gestures, a small laugh escaped her. "My father believed people should help each other and move on." Sebastian looked toward the river. "I know. Then why did you hold on so tightly?" For a moment he seemed unable to answer. Finally he spoke, because letting go felt like forgetting him. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Suddenly she understood something she had missed all along. Sebastian had not spent 15 years carrying a debt. He had spent 15 years carrying grief. The realization softened something inside her. Across the room, a phone vibrated on a nearby table. Sebastian glanced his face. Grace noticed immediately. "What is it?" "The situation is resolved." "The person watching me?" Sebastian nodded. They were looking for connections that no longer matter. And now it is over? Grace studied him carefully. For the first time since meeting him, she believed it. The photographs, the anonymous messages, the strange surveillance, every loose thread that had haunted the story finally felt finished. The mystery was gone. Only the future remained. Dawn began painting pale colors across the horizon. Sebastian drove her back into Manhattan himself. The city was quieter than usual. Early morning light reflected across empty sidewalks and closed storefronts. Neither spoke much during the drive. They no longer needed to. Some conversations only happen once. When they reached her apartment building, Sebastian parked beside the curb. Grace gathered her things slowly. Neither seemed eager to end the moment. "So what happens now?" she asked. Sebastian looked through the windshield at the awakening city. "That depends on you. On me, the promise is fulfilled." He met her eyes. "Everything after this is your choice." Grace considered the answer. For weeks, she had believed Sebastian controlled the story, the money, the protection, the secrets, yet somehow he was giving the final decision back to her, exactly where it belonged. She opened the car door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Cool morning air greeted her. For a second, she stood there looking through the open window. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, not cautious, not uncertain. "Goodbye, Sebastian." Something flickered across his expression before he nodded. "Goodbye, Grace." The car pulled away moments later. Grace watched it disappear into the growing light of morning. She expected sadness. Instead, she felt peace. The mystery had been solved. Her father's story finally made sense. The debt had been paid. The promise had been kept. Yet as she climbed the steps toward her apartment, one thought refused to leave her mind. For the first time since meeting Sebastian Romano, she found herself hoping goodbye was not the final word. Sometimes the ending of a story looks exactly like the beginning. The difference is who is standing beside you when it happens. 3 nights later, Grace Morgan stood behind the diner counter watching rain slide down the front windows. The city outside glowed beneath familiar neon reflections. Coffee steamed from fresh pots. Dishes rattled softly in the kitchen. Customers came and went. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt the same anymore. The mystery that had consumed her life was gone. The questions had answers. The fear had faded. Even the strange feeling of being watched had disappeared. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm. Around 1:30 in the morning, Grace found herself glancing toward the door. Then she laughed quietly at her own behavior. The bell had not rung yet. No dark coat. No familiar face sitting in booth 7. She told herself it did not matter. She focused on wiping down menus instead. 5 minutes later, the bell above the entrance chimed. Grace looked up instinctively. Her heart betrayed her before her expression did. Sebastian Romano stepped inside. No security, no driver, no mystery. Just Sebastian. Rain shimmered across the shoulders of his coat. For a moment, neither moved. Then Grace smiled. "You are late." A faint smile appeared on his face. "I was beginning to think you would not notice. Booth 7 is difficult to ignore." Sebastian glanced toward the familiar booth near the window. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about the waitress." Grace shook her head, trying unsuccessfully to hide her smile. The conversation felt easier now, lighter. No secrets remained standing between them. He took his usual seat. She brought coffee without asking. Some habits deserved to survive. For the next hour, they talked more honestly than they ever had before. Not about investigations, not about debts. They talked about ordinary things. Favorite books, childhood memories, places they wanted to visit. The conversation flowed naturally, as if weeks of tension had finally given way to something simpler, something real. Closing time arrived faster than either expected. The final customer left. The kitchen lights switched off one section at a time. Chairs were turned upside down onto tables. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle mist. Grace finished counting the register and looked across the diner. Sebastian was still there, waiting, not watching the street, not tracking danger, just waiting. For her, a strange warmth settled inside her chest. At exactly 2 in the morning, Grace flipped the sign on the door from open to closed. The familiar click echoed softly through the empty diner. For years she had performed the same routine alone. Tonight felt different. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside. Cool night air greeted her. The city stretched around them in reflections of gold and silver. Sebastian stood beneath the neon sign as the rain faded into mist. Neither rushed to speak. Some moments deserved silence. Grace locked the front door and slipped the keys into her pocket. Then she turned toward him. "So what happens now?" Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. The answer no longer required mystery. "Now I stop looking backward." Grace nodded slowly. And maybe we start looking forward." For the first time since meeting him, She did not need to question his motives. There were no hidden files, no debts left unpaid, no promises left unresolved. Only a man and a woman standing beneath a fading neon sign in the middle of Manhattan. Grace stepped closer, not because she owed him anything. Not because of her father, not because of gratitude, because it was her choice. Sebastian seemed to understand that immediately. The city hummed softly around them. Traffic rolled through distant intersections. Rainwater reflected the lights of passing taxis. Somewhere far away, a ferry horn echoed across the river. Grace smiled. "I think my father would have liked you." Sebastian laughed quietly. "I hope so. He also would have told you to stop carrying 15-year-old guilt." That sounds like something he would say. It definitely is. They began walking down the sidewalk together. No destination, no urgency. Just two people moving into the future one step at a time. Behind them, the diner windows reflected the empty booth where everything had started. Ahead of them, the city stretched into the night, and for the first time since Sebastian Romano walked through those doors, Grace Morgan was not walking home alone.